Polyamory, the practice of engaging in multiple consensual romantic relationships, is becoming more visible. A recent YouGov survey found that 7% of people have been in a consensual non-monogamous relationship, and 23% say they'd consider one. Lavender is a licensed therapist by day, and a burlesque performer by night. With a foot in both conventional and unconventional spaces, she offers insight into how some people are navigating relationships outside of the traditional model. This is a look into the world of polyamory.
You don't want the beginning bit to be like dead awkward, because I'll be like, I'm a nurse, I think.
Maybe I might be 31.
I'm not sure how old I am. Right, shall I go?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, we're rolling.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lavender. I'm 31 and I'm a mental health nurse, gender therapist and a burlesque performer, chair acro performer, queer artist, and I'm polyamorous. So I always think about polyamory as more, so I start off thinking about ethical non-monogamy as an umbrella term, and polyamory sitting underneath the umbrella of ethical non-monogamy. So for me, over time, polyamory has become a better label that fits for how I would describe my relationship style. So polyamory translates to multi-love, and I think people will find within polyamory the style of polyamory that works for them, and for me, kitchen table polyamory is what works. I'd describe it as having multiple meaningful relationships, and that might be romantic, it might be emotional, it might be sexual, or it might be platonic, or it might change over time. And I think that's the really beautiful thing about polyamory, that it doesn't need to be predefined, it can move and evolve as relationships do. Kitchen table polyamory is the idea that everybody within the polycule would feel comfortable sitting at a kitchen table together. So a polycule is a group of people that are linked through the relationships. So they're not necessarily all dating each other, although they might be or might have done, but they would in some way be linked through kind of hinge partners or people who are dating. And for me, within our polycule, something that I've always strived for is that we all get along, we all could like have a cup of tea together, know about each other's lives, and just really comfortably be able to, you know, have a brew, have dinner together. And I think that allows us to be able to talk about any issues that inevitably do arise with any relationship, whether that be a romantic relationship or a friendship or a work relationship. So I think people will describe kitchen table polyamory differently. It depends what the dynamic is for them, but that's essentially what it is. And for us, it works in that we sit really comfortably within each other's lives. I have my lovely husband, and we got married in June this year to end Pride Month, and we've been together for 14 years and obviously married this year, and we live together, so we're financially bonded with 3 cats and a lovely dog. And I have another long-term partner, and we've been together for 3 years actually in April, to think about how long it was. And those are at the moment, those are my 2 main relationships, and that kind of form part of a polycule. So this is something that I've thought about quite a lot in terms of what kind of my future will look like in terms of relationships. And I think when I first started kind of understanding myself as non-monogamous, and as that evolved into polyamory, I think being neurodiverse, being autistic, I had these quite clear ideas around formulating exactly what that would look like, what the dynamic would be like, how that would evolve as my life evolved. And more recently I've been thinking about the idea that we change so much over time that it's practically impossible to envision what our future will look like in a way that will stay exactly the same. So what I mean is, when I first started out as polyamorous, I had these ideas around the people at the time that I was dating and how we would kind of, move and evolve together over time. But that assumed that we would stay exactly the same with no changes to our dynamic, no changes to who we were as people, our political views, where we lived, whether we stayed, non-monogamous or monogamous, or whether that would shift over time. And of course things do shift over time. So I think one of the benefits for polyamory for me has really allowed me to be more flexible in how I view relationships. And there's something really beautiful in how they evolve, and allowing them to evolve as well without having to decide as soon as you meet somebody, this will be the outcome. Which I think for me, that was what didn't fit with monogamy. I think this kind of very heteronormative idea of you find somebody, you meet the one, and the relationship escalator of you will get married and you will have children, and that will be it for the rest of your life, and you're meant to be really happy with that. And if you're not, then you're doing something wrong, you've not succeeded, especially as a woman. So I think although I have got married and I'm very happy with that decision, it was a conscious decision, and it was a decision that was spoken about as equals and thought about in terms of non-monogamy, how that would sit for us and how that would look for our future. And I think this is really relevant, that actually when we decided to get married, part of our vows was that we would love each other for as long as love may last. And I think that's a concept that I really like, and I like that for non-monogamy, because there is no guarantee. You're not guaranteeing that you will love someone forever. You hope you will, and I think I probably will. But you're kind of committing to loving somebody and caring for them for as long as that relationship stays in the way that you've created it for that moment in time, and that could change. Yeah, I think that's something that I've worked really hard on, and something that I've thought about quite a lot in therapy. So being a therapist myself and kind of working quite closely with attachment theory, that's something that I use quite a lot professionally, but also I use that kind of theory for myself with non-monogamy, just thinking about how non-monogamy, polyamory for me meets a lot of my needs. So I'm adopted, and for me, I think creating my own chosen queer family and polyamorous family has been really healing and has been something that I really value. But it hasn't come without its difficulties, and it's taken and still takes quite a lot of work to be able to manage my own emotions and my own rejection sensitivity, and knowing that I ultimately don't have any control over how people feel about me or how they meet my needs. I can ask for a need to be met, but it doesn't mean that it will necessarily be met in the way that I need it to be. Yeah, so I think jealousy is something that comes up for me a fair amount, and as somebody who, as I said before, is adopted and has really had to work hard on thinking about my attachment style and how that fits for me in terms of polyamory, jealousy is something that I think when I first started out as non-monogamous, I felt quite a lot of shame about, and I felt like I was doing it wrong, and that polyamory perhaps wasn't for me because I did feel jealous, and I had this false idea that that wasn't what polyamory was, and that other people didn't feel jealous, so I was clearly not cut out for polyamory. And after a lot of kind of reading, understanding, kind of digesting what polyamory is and how it fits for me, I just realised that isn't true, that it's really normal to feel jealous, and that that's a human emotion and something to be sat with, something to be chewed over, and to really think about what is it that makes me feel jealous. And what I come to understand about myself was it was usually when a need was being unmet. So when you first asked me that question, I really struggled to answer it, because fortunately I've had lots of really good experiences with polyamory, and over time I've been much more able to ask for my needs to be met in a way that helps my partners understand how my needs can be met, and then they can make an informed decision about whether that's something they're able and willing to do or not. And then I know. I think the times when I felt most jealous have been when starting new relationship dynamics, And that's usually been when I've been swept up in excitement with a new relationship dynamic, new relationship energy, and that person's been really exciting, and I've not necessarily been clear whether that person is monogamous or non-monogamous. They've been the kind of wavy in between, we'll see how it goes. And I think it's really easy to get swept up, for me, with people like that who feel very exciting and not feel super secure or sure about the trajectory of the relationship. And that tends to be when I feel most jealous. Really a mixture of both. I think for me they intertwine so much. So I'm quite a sexual person, and kink plays quite a big part in my life, and in quite a healing way, and in a way that's really fun and playful. So for me, my queerness, my kink life, my polyamory, and kind of core sense of self, they all interlink. So when I feel jealous, it probably would play out in all of those dynamics, the kind of sexual and romantic element to it. I guess what tends to happen is, as relationships evolve and we feel more secure with the dynamic and the relationship, that's when jealousy tends to settle, for me, because I feel much more sure about how I sit within someone's life and how they feel about me. But we're all sluts, and yes, it's true. No, I think that's one of the kind of main stereotypes, is that polyamory is all about sex, and it's about, you know, having sex with multiple people, and that can be an element of it, but I think that would be reductive to what polyamory is for a lot of people. And I always make this joke that in work, when people know that I'm polyamorous, and I talk quite openly about it, it's not a secret, and I kind of say you'd be surprised how boring my life can be at times, that it isn't, this kind of big, exciting, chaotic. I mean, it kind of is, but that's out of choice. It's not because of polyamory, and a lot of the time it's about, having a really bad day at work and your partner being available emotionally and physically to meet your needs, where perhaps your other partners are busy, or perhaps they've had a bad day and they've not got the emotional capacity to be there for you. There's multiple people that are very able to step up and be there, and vice versa. And it can be as mundane as that, as any relationship, monogamous or non-monogamous, can be. So something that I've learned over time, and kind of done lots of reading around polyamory, and I think that's the kind of academic side, that you can read so much theory about something, but actually in reality you don't know how it's going to play out. But something that I'd kind of prepared for was having check-ins, and having fairly regular check-ins around how everyone's feeling, when big changes are happening, just making sure that we create time and space to talk about that, separately and collectively. So that's something that I do try to do. I think that comes down to boundaries, like we said before, and having those conversations around having regular screening and being able to have that conversation really openly with all partners. It's something that it would depend. It would depend on the dynamic. I think if it was something that came completely out of the blue and I wasn't expecting it, I think that would be quite tricky to digest, especially if it wasn't something that I was prepared for. But over time, I've had relationships where people have decided to be monogamous, and they have ended the non-monogamous relationship with me in order to pursue monogamy, and that is really difficult. It can be really, really tough to not feel rejected and take that personally, or feel really heartbroken in a way that feels kind of unjust, really, because people are allowed to make decisions about what relationship style they want. So I think it can be really tricky and really confusing to process heartbreak when the adult rational part of you knows that people absolutely have a right to pursue whatever relationship style feels right for them, and my rational adult part is like, good for you, you go, you've consciously decided what your relationship style is, and that is absolutely what I would advocate for. And my inner child is fucking gutted that they've not picked me and it's because of me, or I'm not good enough. And I think that's, for me, why I said before that attachment theory, I think, is so linked to polyamory, and to be honest, any relationship style, that it's so helpful to have a good understanding of what your attachment style is and how that plays out in relationships. So you can't prepare yourself for heartbreak, that's impossible, but you can prepare yourself for how you might respond to certain rejections, what your triggers might be, and what you need when you're healing from heartbreak. Yeah. So I think marriage is a really complicated kind of construct, because I guess legally in the UK, as far as I'm aware, you can't legally be married to more than one person, or else it'd be polygamy, which is illegal. And my personal view on that is I think that's really stupid. I think you should be able to marry more than one person. And me and my husband have spoken about that for quite some time, actually, and our view on that, you know, we have our individual thoughts, but we actually align really nicely on this, is that, you know, if it was legal, we'd both be very open to marrying more than one person. I think for us, we had so many, as we always do, really deep philosophical conversations around what is marriage and what does it mean to us, and really thinking about it as something that was a celebration of our relationship, not necessarily a legal contract, you know, a really sexy legal contract, so like sign that we, you know, are going to love each other forever. Because as we said before, for us it was, we will love each other for as long as love may last, and I don't envision our love not being there, or not loving each other forever. So that just felt like a really easy thing to agree to. And from kind of a legal perspective, we have a mortgage together. That's really serious, and that would be in a lot of ways much more tricky to separate and to divide assets in that way than a marriage. And so for us, we thought about it in terms of creating a day that was a big celebration of how we love each other, how we love the people in our lives, bringing everyone together from our polycule, our queer family, some of our family, our friends, and having a day of celebration surrounding that. In terms of whether we would have other relationships with people who are married, of course, yeah, absolutely. There's not any rules or kind of script around whether or not we would date somebody who was married. I think what I would be conscious of is if somebody was married and they viewed marriage in a way that felt radically different to how I viewed marriage. So if, for example, somebody was married and they viewed their relationship as, I'm trying to think how to word this in a way that sounds non-judgmental, because I don't mean it to be judgmental of how anyone creates their relationships, but if somebody had a marriage, you know, dynamic where they was married to somebody and they viewed themselves as like, you know, really kind of hierarchical concepts of their kind of the main people, and everybody else kind of came below that, and they had vetoes and things like this, and it was more an idea around trying to save something within the marriage or bring something exciting in, I'd be really conscious of like my boundaries and my limitations with that, because I don't think that's something that I would feel safe enough within a dynamic where I didn't feel like an equal part, to not get jealous and to have my needs met. So that wouldn't work for me. So I'm not 100% sure whether I want biological children. I think being adopted, it's opened up conversations from very early on, even when I wasn't entirely sure whether I was monogamous or non-monogamous, as to whether or not I'd have biological children or perhaps foster or adopt or kind of have an alternative way of having children in my life. I think that's something that polyamory has been really, really helpful with, is helping me consciously make informed choices around aspects of my life that would otherwise have probably been pre-decided for me, because I was raised Catholic, so I'm not a practicing Catholic and I'm not religious, but I do consider myself quite spiritual. And I think from growing up in that environment, there was a lot of ideas around what I should do and what the trajectory of my life would be in terms of being married and having children, and that being the right and good way of being. And over time, that's really helped me to think about, what do I actually want and how would that fit in my life, and what are the reasons why I would want children if I was to have children. So I might have children, and that's something that I'll decide over time. And if I was to have children, I would want to be as authentic as possible and be able to have our queer polyamorous family be a supportive family network in terms of the polycule. So no, I wouldn't say there aren't any rules within our relationships that we each have and kind of collectively. That's something that doesn't really sit right with me. I think everyone will work out their relationship styles in a way that makes sense for them and helps keep them safe. I think at the very beginning, when I was really young and very embryonic to polyamory, there was probably more scaffolding around the dynamics in order to help us all feel safe and secure. And as time has gone on, and I certainly feel so much more secure and confident and sure that polyamory is a really core part of who I am, that isn't necessary, and that scaffolding has all broken down and gone away, and I think that's more ethical. I certainly feel much more at peace with the idea that there are no rules around the relationship, because I think that stifles the ability for other relationships to develop naturally. In terms of boundaries, I think that's a really important conversation to have with every individual relationship, and also allowing everybody to have a discussion around what their boundaries are. I think that's really important when your relationship is kind of financially bonded, you're married or you live with somebody, that boundaries are discussed in a way that helps everyone to feel on an equal footing, because I think it can be really tough when you're seeming to come in from the outside of something, which is certainly something I try really hard to not make somebody feel like they're kind of on the outside of a dynamic. And you asked before about what do I put in place, or what do we put in place in our dynamics to help everyone feel kind of safe and open communication and things like that. And I think that's something that is really important to me, that people don't feel like they have to in some way meet me and my husband where we're at, because we're not a package deal. It's not a kind of you date one of us, you date both of us. And I know some people will do polyamory in that way, and that's not the way in which we do it. It just doesn't fit for us.
Since recording this interview, the stats on the YouGov website regarding those engaged with polyamory have decreased, although polyamory does seem to have made more appearances in mainstream media as well as social media. Lavender has had a lot of change since the initial interview. They were made redundant, had a cat pass away, and a relationship de-escalated to non-romantic. In spite of all of this loss and change, she remains hopeful. They do not see it as a reflection of polyamory, but rather an example of how relationships can change to work for the best, and she remains very good friends with her previous partner. She still works in the queer community. The redundancy gave her the opportunity to start her own small queer collective, the Lavender Therapy Collective, and she is most proud of this. Lavender is active in promoting queer and trans rights and passionate about people having equitable, fair and safe access to healthcare. She continued to perform and has gone from strength to strength. She'll be debuting at Homo Block, a huge bucket list moment for her, representing the hard work she has put into performing for her community. She is the head of the Performing Arts Department at the West Art Collective and has many plans for the future.